The first thing we found was the radio. It was just sitting upright in the snow, like somebody had placed it there for us to notice.
Not dropped, not kicked loose, not half buried.
Placed. The speaker was still hissing, even though the battery should have died hours before. And every few seconds, a man's voice pushed through the static. He just kept saying the exact same thing.
Say in a natural American voice, flat and robotic. Trail crew returning to base.
That was the part that froze all of us right where we stood.
We were up under those black spruce trees on the north side of Mount Rogers. It didn't make any sense.
Because the trail crew had already returned.
All 4 of them were standing right behind me.
They were wrapped up in borrowed parkas and blankets, shivering so hard you could hear their teeth clicking.
They were safe, but they looked terrified.
So, if all 4 guys were standing right there with us,
Then the voice coming out of that radio belonged to a 5th man. A 5th man none of them remembered bringing with them.
It's a realization that just drops your stomach.
I've carried that sound in my head for 23 years.
I hear it in running water, in empty cabins, even in the whine of old fluorescent lights. Sometimes when the weather drops fast and the trees ice over, I still hear it under my porch. Before I say more, I gotta ask you to stay with this. Not for views and not for me, but because there are things written in ranger logs that never make it to the public reports. And once the men who remember them are gone, those things get buried with us. Back then, I was working backcountry patrol around Grayson Highlands. Most folks know that country for the wild ponies and those long, wind-stripped views. In good weather, it actually feels almost kind. Rolling grass, blue ridges fading out like smoke. But in January, that country changes completely. Freezing fog climbs up from the valleys and seals every single branch in glass. The temperature drops and the whole mountain just locks down.
Say in a natural American voice, ominous warning, it becomes a totally different world up there.
Sound goes really strange up there in the fog. Say, in a natural American, you can hear a zipper from 50 yards away, but lose a shout from 10. Footsteps seem to come from the wrong side of you, eerie and quiet. Even the ponies vanish, and all you hear is their heavy breathing just beyond sight.
back in 2003, cell phones were basically useless up in that high country.
Say, in a natural American voice, GPS units were kind of clunky, so you had to rely on paper maps, radios, and your own gut instinct. We'd had a wet freeze that did some damage along the old trail. Nothing too crazy, just enough to send a 4-man crew in for a repair.
They headed out before sunrise.
The guy running the crew was a quiet fellow named Ellis. He was a former lineman, and he'd worked through more bad weather than most. If Ellis said a trail was passable, you trusted him. The plan was simple. Hike in, fix the trail, spend the night at a closed service cabin, and hike out. Late that afternoon, Ellis radioed in to say everyone was accounted for. But he also mentioned the fog was getting thick, and ice was forming fast. Then he told dispatch he heard somebody calling from the ridge, but figured it was just lost hikers.
Nobody made a big deal out of it, since voices carry weirdly in the fog.
But the next morning, Ellis radioed back, sounding totally flat. He said they found tracks outside the cabin. Dispatch asked if they were human, and Ellis said there were 5 sets of boots. That's impossible for a 4-man crew. He added that one set circling the cabin matched his exact tread. Those were the last clear words we got from him. By late morning, the weather turned into a nightmare. When the crew missed their check-ins, we got a search response moving fast. We found their crew truck parked at Massey Gap, locked and totally empty. The only weird thing was a strip of orange flagging tied to the passenger mirror, frozen solid in the ice. Our crew was using blue tape that week, so the orange stood out. I cut it loose and saw someone had scratched words into the plastic. It said, "Do not answer from below." We headed up in 2 teams, following the trail toward Wilburn Ridge.
The fog was so thick, the world just ended at arm's length.
Ice clattered in the trees above us, and the wind made the open ground moan. About a mile in, we heard Ellis.
Not on the radio, but from the trees below the trail.
He said, "Trail crew returning to base." It was as clear as a man standing 20 yards downhill. We all stopped dead in our tracks. One of the volunteers started to call his name. I grabbed his sleeve hard before he could step off the trail.
The voice came again.
Trail crew returning to base.
Same words, same tone. No urgency, no breath.
Then our radios hissed at the exact same time.
Say, in a natural American voice, steady narrative. Dispatch came through broken, asking if we'd made contact.
Our lead answered that we heard someone below us.
But before he finished, another voice came from upslope.
Chilling realization. It was Ellis again. Do not answer from below. That was when every man in that line stopped trusting his own ears.
We moved toward the upslope voice, staying tight.
We only called out on the radio after that.
Say, after maybe 10 minutes, we found footprints crossing the trail from right to left.
4 sets.
They came out of the fog, crossed the packed snow, and disappeared toward a stand of spruce.
Behind them, delayed by maybe 8 feet, was a 5th set.
Same boot size as Ellis, but the prints were wrong.
Too deep at the toes. Like whatever made them was leaning forward so hard, it barely touched its heels. We followed them into the spruce stand.
The trees swallowed the sound of the wind.
Say in a natural American voice, listing items slowly. We found a pack wedged between 2 trees, then a saw, then a thermos. Set down neatly 1 piece at a time, like they were asked to make themselves lighter.
100 yards farther in, we found them. Say in a natural American voice. All 4 men were sitting in a row beneath the rock overhang, facing the same direction.
Hands tucked under their arms, eyes wide open.
Ellis was at the end. Lips blue, beard frosted solid.
For one terrible second, I thought we were too late.
They were just sitting there, completely still. Then Ellis finally blinked. We got heat packs on him right away and wrapped him up tight.
They were freezing, confused, and honestly, pretty spooked.
Nobody wanted to say it out loud, though. They kept asking how long they'd been out there. I told him it hadn't even been a full day since they left the cabin. Ellis just shook his head and said they'd been walking for 3 days. The rest of the crew just nodded along with him.
It made no sense. Then one of the younger guys just leaned over and got sick right there in the snow.
We finally got them moving down the mountain. But the whole way back, they kept looking over their shoulders. Like something was stepping right where we just walked. We were almost back to the gap when we saw it. Say in a natural American voice, slow and deliberate. A radio, just sitting straight up in the snow. It was placed there, right in our path. Say in a natural American voice. Ellis knew it right away. He saw the cracked corner and the tape around the battery. It was his radio.
Then a voice came through the stack.
It was Ellis's voice saying they were returning to base.
He just looked at me and whispered, "That ain't me."
One of the guys reached down and clicked it off, but it kept talking. Somebody even yanked the battery out, and the damn thing just kept talking.
Then the static shifted. A different voice came through, real quiet.
It was my voice, telling everyone to stay on the trail. Say in a natural American voice. Absolute stillness. Nobody moved until it stopped.
The official report blamed it all on whiteout conditions and exposure.
That was the clean version people could live with.
But 2 weeks later, Ellis told me what really happened, right before he quit trail work for good.
He said it all started at the service cabin before dawn.
They woke up to the sound of knocking, but it wasn't on the door. It was coming from right under the floorboards. Say, in a natural American voice, slow and rhythmic. 3 slow taps, a pause, and 3 more. That cabin sat on short concrete piers, leaving maybe 2 feet of crawl space underneath.
It was way too tight for a man to move around, and way too freezing for any animal.
Ellis grabbed his flashlight and threw open the front door to look outside. The second that door swung open, the knocking stopped dead. Just complete, dead silence. He shined his light down into the snow and saw 5 sets of tracks. 4 were from his guys the night before. But there was a fresh 5th set circling the entire cabin.
The really messed up part? That 5th track matched Ellis's boot pattern exactly.
He immediately checked his own boots sitting right beside the stove. They were bone dry and still unlaced.
The crew packed up fast and decided to hike out. Ellis took a lead.
Even in the thick fog, it should have been a straightforward hike.
But the trails started looping. Not bending, but looping.
They passed the exact same split birch tree 3 times.
Same lightning scar, same fallen branch. The second time they passed it, Ellis tied a piece of blue flagging tape to it. The third time they passed that tree, the blue tape was already there, frozen stiff. But someone had scratched words into the ice on the tape. It said, "Do not answer from below." Soon after, they heard someone shouting for help from down in the hollow.
It sounded like a man's voice, far away.
One guy wanted to go down, until the voice used his first name.
For the next hour, the woods played a sick game.
Say in a natural American voice, grim and serious. Every voice they heard came from down below in the freezing fog.
It wasn't just random shouts anymore. It was their wives, their brothers, even a dead father.
The breaking point for Ellis was when a woman's voice drifted up through the ice.
It was his mother, who'd been buried back in Marion since '88.
She asked Eli to come help her with the porch light.
Nobody out there knew that nickname.
They kept pushing uphill, just desperate to get away from those voices.
But the ground under their boots felt like it was tilting the wrong way. The freezing fog got so thick, their headlamps just bounced back like solid white walls. That's when they finally saw the 5th man walking ahead of them. You couldn't get a clear look, just a shape slipping between the trees. But it had the exact same height, the same coat, and the same slight limp as Ellis. The youngest guy thought Ellis had somehow gotten ahead of them, so he opened his mouth to yell out. Before he could even make a sound, Ellis lunged back. He grabbed the kid by the collar and clamped a heavy glove right over his mouth. The second Ellis grabbed him, the shape of a head stopped dead in its tracks. It didn't turn around or look back at them. It just stood there, perfectly still, with its back to them in the freezing whiteout. The silence just stretched out, heavy and suffocating under all that ice.
Then, from deep down in the hollow below them, a voice called out.
It was Ellis's own voice, totally calm, saying, "Trail crew returning to base." That was the moment the guys finally broke. They panicked and ran, slipping on the ice and dropping their heavy gear. They scrambled blindly through the woods until they hit a rushing creek. A creek Ellis swore shouldn't have been there. Across the freezing water of that impossible creek stood the service cabin. It was the exact same cabin they'd run away from hours earlier. Smoke was curling from the stovepipe, and a warm yellow light was glowing in the window. But the cabin wasn't empty. Standing inside, lit up by that amber light, were 4 men looking out into the snow. It wasn't a reflection. It was the 4 of them, standing shoulder to shoulder, watching themselves freeze in the dark.
One of the guys inside the cabin slowly raised his hand.
And before Ellis could even grab him, the kid standing next to him raised his hand right back.
The second he did, the cabin went pitch black.
After that, the trust between them was just gone. Ellis said the worst part wasn't even the voices or being followed. It was the doubt. Every time somebody spoke, the others stared just a little too long.
And if you were walking up front, you were always listening for an extra set of footsteps behind you.
Eventually, they found this deep rock overhang. Steady and authoritative, Ellis made the call to huddle up and wait for a rescue team.
But as they settled in, the youngest guy just broke down.
He started crying, and then he said something that froze the rest of them. He swore there were 5 of them when they left the truck. He said a guy named Porter had been with him the whole time.
An older guy in a faded red cap, carrying a Pulaski.
He even remembered the smell of his chewing tobacco and a scar on his jaw.
At first, the others told him he was losing his mind.
But then, one by one, it started creeping in.
Like trying to remember a bad dream after you wake up. A 5th guy at the sign-out sheet.
A 5th coffee cup by the stove. A 5th bedroll in the corner. Ellis swore up and down there were only 4 of them.
But when he counted the tracks in his own memory, there were 5.
When he pictured the hike in, there were 5.
He could actually see Porter walking behind them, keeping his head down so you couldn't see his face.
Then the kid stopped crying and whispered something worse.
He said Porter was still with them.
Right there, under the rock.
Sitting right behind them in the dark. He said he could hear him breathing.
Not a single one of them turned around.
They just sat there, completely stiff, staring straight ahead into the snow.
They were frozen, not just from the cold, but from pure terror.
Obeying a rule nobody ever actually taught them. That's exactly how we found them. That's exactly how we found them. Sitting in a row, refusing to look back. They learned the hard way how to survive whatever's up there.
Don't answer from below. Don't look behind you.
And whatever you do, don't count twice.
Officially, there's no record of a guy named Porter on that crew.
No payroll, no emergency contact, nothing. But I saw the original sign-out sheet before it disappeared from the file. There were 4 printed names.
And right under them, written in faint pencil, was a 5th.
I confronted Ellis with that sign-out sheet months later. He stared at it, shaking so hard his chair almost tipped over. He swore he didn't write it.
Then he whispered that maybe he did it after they got back.
Just to give the thing a place to return to.
Ellis passed away 7 years later.
They said it was a heart attack.
He was all alone in his kitchen during a brutal ice storm. When his neighbor found him, the back door was standing wide open.
Snow had blown halfway across the floor.
Sitting on his kitchen table was a half-empty mug of coffee. Right next to it was an old park radio he had no reason to own. And curled up beside that radio was a stiff strip of orange flagging tape.
There was no writing on the outside of the tape.
I know, because I turned it over myself. Scratched into the inside, deep enough to split the plastic, were 5 words.
Trail crew returning to base.
I retired shortly after that.
I figured that was the end of it for me. You learn to let bad memories settle and live with the silence. You learn to avoid certain mountain roads in bad weather.
And you turn the radio off when the static starts speaking in a rhythm.
But last winter, my 12-year-old grandson begged me to take him hiking.
The weather was uncharacteristically clear in January.
No ice, no fog, just a bright blue sky.
For an hour on that trail, I almost believed the mountain had forgotten me. Then my grandson stopped near a split birch tree. He looked downhill and asked if somebody was calling us.
At first, I just heard the wind moving over the bald. Then, very faintly from the hollow below, A man's voice drifted up.
Eli, come help me with the porch light.
I grabbed his hand hard and immediately turned us around.
We didn't run, because running gives panic a shape. We just walked back at a brisk, rigid pace.
Every few minutes he tried to look behind us, and every time I strictly told him not to.
When we finally reached the parking lot, I was frantically unlocking the truck. That was when my grandson asked me a question that stopped my heart.
He pointed a finger back toward the distant ridge.
And he asked me who the fifth man was.
I followed his gaze to the edge of the spruce trees.
It was too far away to see clearly, but that faded red cap was unmistakable.
I shoved my grandson into the truck and drove down the mountain.
And I refused to ever look in the rearview mirror.
That night, after I got home, I found something in the bed of my pickup.
It was sitting right against the wheel well, say in a natural American voice, completely dry, even though it had been raining all evening. It was the old radio.
I recognized the cracked corner and the tape around the battery cover.
It was the exact same one from 23 years ago.
I didn't even touch it.
I just stood under the porch light until my hands went numb, staring at that dead piece of plastic lying against the wheel well.
I went inside and locked the doors. But at 4:16 in the morning, it turned itself on. The static hissed right through the walls of my house.
The voice that came through was calm, tired, patient. But it wasn't Ellis this time. It was mine.
Saying, "Trail crew returning to base."
I couldn't take it.
I buried the radio in a heavy feed sack and put it in the truck. Then I drove 3 counties away before the sun even came up.
I found an old quarry pod.
I threw it in and watched the black water close over it.
Say, in a natural hope, I told myself that was enough, that it was finally over.
But 2 nights ago, my grandson called out from his bedroom. He was terrified.
He said there was someone standing right outside his window.
He said the person wasn't even looking in? They were just standing there with their back to the glass.
Waiting to be counted. I got to his room and looked at the frost on the glass.
All I saw was the reflection of 4 people in the room.
And a 5th shape standing right behind us.
I just froze there, staring at that glass.
My heart was hammering against my ribs. It was right there in the room of us.
I pulled my grandson behind me.
I stepped right between him and whatever was casting that shadow.
I wasn't gonna let it dig him.
But when I finally forced myself to turn around,
The room was completely empty.
Just the 2 of us, standing there in the quiet.
I looked back at the window.
The frost was already melting away.
The reflection was gone, like it was never even there. I didn't sleep a wink that night. I pulled a chair up right next to his bed.
I just sat there in the dark, watching the door, until the sun came up. When morning finally broke, the house was dead quiet.
The kind of quiet that feels heavy, you know?
Like the mountain was holding its breath.
I went outside as soon as it was light enough to see.
I walked right up to the grass under his window.
I had to know if I was losing my mind.
there was one set of boot tracks in the frost.
Deep at the toes, leaning forward, heading straight back toward the tree line. I guess some things don't ever really leave the mountain. They just wait out there in the fog, waiting for you to remember them.
We don't talk about it much now, but I keep the doors locked.
And I never, ever count the footsteps behind me.